Our solar system. Seymour, Simon. For a moment of night, we have a glimpse of ourselves and of our world, island and its stream of stars, voyaging between horizons across the eternal seas of space and time. Henry Beston, The Outermost House. The solar system was born among billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. About 4.6 billion years ago, a huge cloud of dust and hydrogen gas floating at the edges of the galaxy began to pull together to form a globe. The particles packed more and more tightly together and became hotter and hotter. Finally, the enormous heat in the center of the globe set off a chain of nuclear explosions, and the sun began to shine. The blazing sun blasted away the nearby gases and dust into a spinning oval ring. As the particles in the ring began to cool, they clumped together into rocky or icy masses called planetesimals. These became the rest of the solar system: planets, moons, asteroids, meteoroids, and comets. The sun is just an ordinary star among the more than 100 billion stars in the galaxy. It is not the biggest or the brightest star, but the sun is the star nearest to our planet, Earth, and the center of our solar system. 9 planets travel around the sun in paths called orbits. Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars are called the inner planets. These 4 rocky planets are much smaller than the 4 giant outer planets: Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, which are made mostly of gases. Pluto, the smallest and outermost planet, seven of the planets, including Earth, have moons circling around them. Thousands of minor planets called asteroids also orbit the sun. Many of these lumps of rock circle the sun in a broad asteroid belt between the orbits of the planets Mars and Jupiter. Still other, smaller rocks called meteoroids, as well as many comets, travel around the sun. The sun is huge compared to Earth. If the sun were hollow, it could hold 1.3 million Earths. Think of this. If Earth were the size of a basketball, and the sun would be a giant globe as big as a basketball court. In fact, the sun is about 600 times bigger than all the other planets, moons, asteroids, comets, and meteoroids in the solar system put together. Hydrogen is the sun's fuel. Like an endless hydrogen bomb, the sun uses about 4 million tons of hydrogen every second. Still, the sun has enough hydrogen to continue shining for another 5 to 6 billion years. The sun is all important to life on Earth. Green plants need sunlight to grow, animals eat plants for food, and we need animals and plants to live. Our weather and climate depend on the sun. Without the sun, there'd be no heat, no light, no clouds, no rain, no living thing on Earth. At the very center of the sun is its core, about as big as the planet Jupiter. Here, constant explosions raise the temperature as high as 27 million degrees Fahrenheit. Surrounding the core are 2 layers, called the radiative zone and the convective zone. The sun's surface is called the photosphere, a sea of boiling gases about 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But there are some hotter areas that form, just like bubbles in boiling water. Giant storms called sunspots also erupt on the surface. Flaming streams of gases called prominences sometimes arch up from sunspots through the sun's atmosphere. Prominences can travel at speeds of 200 miles per second and stretch for more than 100,000 miles. The sun has an inner atmosphere called the chromosphere and an outer atmosphere called the corona. The corona stretches outward for millions of miles into space. During a total solar eclipse, the corona is visible as a halo around the sun. Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It was named by the Romans after the fleet messenger of their gods. Mercury revolves quickly around the sun, but rotates very slowly on its axis, so a day on Mercury is almost as long as a year. Mercury is the second smallest planet in our solar system, after Pluto. Mercury is much smaller than Earth. In fact, it is smaller than Jupiter's and Saturn's largest moons. Mercury itself has no moons. Mercury is often hard to spot because it is only visible during twilight hours on some days close to the sun's bright glare. When Mercury is viewed from Earth through a telescope, it appears to change its shape from day to day, much the way our moon does. The surface of Mercury is heavily cratered like that of our moon. The larger craters were made by countless meteorites or asteroids crashing into the surface, which is not protected by an atmosphere. Many smaller craters also spot the terrain. Most of these were made when the rocks were thrown from the impact of the meteorite came crashing back down. Mercury is an almost airless planet. Because Mercury is so close to the sun, the temperature rises about 750 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, hot enough to melt lead. Yet, during the long nights, with no atmosphere to trap the heat, the temperature on the dark side drops to negative 300 degrees Fahrenheit. That is colder than Earth's south pole. Venus is the brightest object in the night sky after our moon. The Romans named the brilliant planet Venus after their goddess of love and beauty. Venus is sometimes called the evening star or the morning star, but Venus is not a star. It is the second planet from the sun, after Mercury and just before Earth. Venus rotates from east to west, the opposite of most other planets and moons in the solar system. Venus is a bit smaller than Earth, and it has no moons. From Earth, Venus seems to change its shape just as our moon does. When it is close to Earth, Venus appears much larger than when it is on the other side of the sun. But the clouds covering the surface reflect light so well that Venus appears bright, even when it is far away. Venus is sometimes called Earth's sister planet because they are about the same size, but Venus is very different from Earth. Like Earth, Venus is covered by thick layers of clouds, but there is still very little water on Venus, so the clouds around it are not made of water droplets. Instead, they're composed of droplets of sulfuric acid. Below the clouds is a thick atmosphere of carbon dioxide. Venus is a scorching desert with temperatures of 900 degrees Fahrenheit, the hottest planet in the solar system. Venus's atmosphere is mostly responsible for the intense heat. sunlight passes through the atmosphere and heats the rocky surface. The rocks radiate heat, and the atmosphere traps the heat and doesn't allow it to escape. This is called the greenhouse effect, because the glass windows in a greenhouse act in the same way. NASA's Magellan spacecraft have been orbiting and photographing Venus since August 10, 1990. It uses a special kind of radar that shows surface details down to the size of a football field, with 10 times the clarity of any previous photos. This global view of the surface of Venus was computer produced from the first cycle of the Magellan mapping. The colors are based on the images taken by the earlier Soviet spacecraft. Venus has large craters, but no small ones. That's because the planet's atmosphere is so dense that it stops smaller incoming meteors before they can hit the ground and make a crater. Earth might have been named oceans or water. That's because Earth is the only planet in the solar system with large amounts of liquid water on its surface and in its atmosphere. Earth is the third planet from the Sun. If the Sun were much closer, and the seas would boil away. If the Sun were further away, the water would freeze over. The Sun is just the right distance for life to exist on Earth. As far as we know, Earth is the only planet that has living things. This photograph of Earth from space was taken by Apollo 15 astronauts as they headed home from the moon. The brown places are land, and the dark blue places are oceans. The white clouds are part of Earth's atmosphere. Earth is larger than Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Pluto, but much smaller than Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. From space, Earth looks like a perfect ball. In fact, Earth is about 27 miles wider at the equator than at the poles, but as it orbits, the Earth spins like a giant top. One complete spin is called a day. Earth is tilted a little to one side as it travels around the Sun. For part of the year, the northern half of the Earth is summer because it's tilted towards the Sun and gets more direct rays of sunlight for a longer part of the day. During that time, the southern half is tilted away, so it has winter. As Earth continues to orbit, the southern half is tilted toward the Sun and has summer, while the northern half is tilted away and has winter. Earth is encircled by a protective blanket of air called the atmosphere, which helps keep the temperature fairly steady. The atmosphere is mostly made up of gases, nitrogen and oxygen, along with a small amount of carbon dioxide and tiny particles of dust and water. We live at the bottom of the atmosphere in a 5 to 10 layer of the air called the troposphere. Most weather takes place in the troposphere. The photo shows the spinning clouds of a typhoon in the troposphere over the Pacific Ocean. Earth is covered by a 5 to 30 mile deep layer of rocks called the crust. The solid crust floats on the mantle, and a 1,800 mile thick layer of heavy melted rock. The crust is cracked into a number of huge pieces called plates. Volcanoes and earthquakes shake the land where the plates meet each other, such as along the rim of the Pacific Ocean. Earth's crust is constantly changing. This is a photograph of a mountainous area in the western United States. The moon is Earth's closest neighbor in the space, only about 1/4 miles away. In space, that is very close. This photo of a crescent Earth over the barren landscape of the moon was taken by Apollo 17 astronauts December 1972. The moon's surface is covered by thousands of bowl-shaped craters. The craters were formed by rocky meteorites of asteroids crashing into the moon, which is not protected by the atmosphere. In 1969 and the early 1970s, astronauts from the Apollo space program landed on the moon to gather information. Mars is the fourth planet from the Sun. It appears so bright in the night sky because it is closer to us than any other planet except Venus. Because it shines with a red color, it made the early Romans think of blood and war, so they named the planet Mars after their god of war. The surface of Mars is covered by orange-red dusty soil, which is blown from one spot to another by the wind in the very cold, thin atmosphere. The orange-red color is due to the presence of the chemical iron oxide in the soil and rocks. Millions of years ago, when Mars was a young planet, water flowed on the surface. Some water may still remain hidden in underground reservoirs. Jupiter is the giant planet of the solar system, more than 1.5 times as big as the other planets put together. If Jupiter were hollow, more than 1,300 planet Earths could fit inside. Jupiter is the fifth planet from the Sun and was named after the ruler of the Roman gods. Jupiter is a gas planet of hydrogen and helium covered by constantly moving clouds, hundreds of miles thick. One of the Voyager's most exciting discoveries was that Jupiter had a thin ring circling the planet. The photograph shows the edge of Jupiter and part of the ring. Jupiter has at least 16 moons. The outer moons are small, most under 50 miles across. The fourth largest moon are named Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. Nearly 400 years after Galileo, the Voyager spaceships gave us close-up looks of Jupiter. Ganymede is the biggest, larger than planet Mercury. Europa is covered by a smooth ocean of ice. Callisto is ice with small amounts of rocks on top of a deep, frozen ocean. And Io has something that no other moon in the solar system has: exploding volcanoes. Saturn is the second largest planet after Jupiter. If Saturn were hollow, about 750 planet Earths would fit inside it. Like Jupiter, Saturn is a gas planet made up of mostly hydrogen and helium. Saturn is the sixth planet from the Sun and was named after the Roman god of farming. Even if you look through a powerful telescope on Earth, Saturn appears to have just a few rings, but the Voyager spacecraft took photos that showed the larger rings are made of thousands of smaller rings within rings. There are so many rings around Saturn they look like the grooves in a phonograph record. Saturn has the most moons of any planet in the solar system. More than 20 have been discovered, and there are probably others. Saturn has one large moon, 6 that are medium-sized, and at least 14 smaller ones. Uranus is the 7th planet from the Sun. Years after its discovery by William Herschel through a telescope in 1781, the planet was named Uranus after the Greek god of heaven and the ruler of the world. Uranus is a ringed planet made up of mostly gases, about halfway in size between Jupiter and Earth. If Uranus were hollow, about 50 planet Earths could fit inside. Uranus has 5 large moons and at least 10 smaller ones. This view shows part of Miranda, innermost of the 5 larger moons, circling about 65,000 miles away from the cloud tops of the ringed Uranus. Miranda is the strangest of the moons. Huge canyons, deep growths, ridges, and rope-like markings cover its surface. All this on a moon only 300 miles across. Neptune is too far from Earth to be seen without a telescope. Galileo saw Neptune through his small telescope but mistook it for a star. It was first identified as a planet in 1846. Later, the planet was named Neptune, after the Roman god of the sea. Neptune is just a bit smaller than Uranus. Neptune is a ringed gas planet with dark storms, giant hurricanes, and streaky white clouds of methane ice that float 35 miles above the lower cloud deck. "12 years and more than 2.8 billion miles after leaving Earth, Voyager 2 whizzed past Neptune on August 25th, 1989, and headed on its way out of the solar system. The spacecraft found that Neptune has 2 bright outer rings, a fainter inner ring, and a thin ring of dusty material. A world unlike any other is how scientists describe Neptune's moon, Triton. Neptune has at least 2 large moons and 6 smaller ones. Triton is the biggest, about 1,700 miles across, nearly the same size of our own moon. Triton is colder than any other object ever measured in the solar system. Asteroids are very small worlds that circle the Sun, mainly between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, a region called the asteroid belt. About 3,000 asteroids have been discovered, but scientists think that there are many thousands more. Pluto is the 9th planet of the solar system, and usually the most distant. But Pluto has an odd stretched and tilted orbit, which brings it closer to the Sun than Neptune for 20 out of every 250 years. So between 1979 and 1999, Pluto is closer to the Sun than Neptune. Pluto was discovered by Clyde Tombaugh, a young American astronomer, in 1930. The planet remained undiscovered for many years because it is so far from Earth and less than 2/3 the size of Earth's moon. Pluto was named after the Greek and Roman god of the underworld. Comets orbit the Sun, but they are quite unlike planets. When a comet approaches Earth, it may look spectacular, with long glowing tails stretching far across the sky. But comets don't always look like that. Most comets circle the dark edges of the solar system. Far from the Sun, a comet is just a dirty snowball, a frozen ball of ice a few miles wide, covered by a layer of black dust. Meteorites are small pieces of metal or rock that may have been swept away off the asteroids or comets. We can't see them in space, but when a meteoroid enters Earth's atmosphere, we see a bright streak of light flashing across the sky. They are then called meteors. Our bodies are made up of some of the same atoms that formed the sun and stars and created the planets, moons, asteroids, comets, and meteoroids. Truly, we are all children of the universe.